Welcome to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the book of Leviticus from the Old Testament. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Leviticus, isn't that all about ancient rituals and a bunch of rules?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're not wrong. But trust me on this one. There's a reason Leviticus has resonated for centuries. And we're going to uncover those deeper layers together.
You see, Leviticus offers a fascinating glimpse into the worldview of the ancient Israelites. Their beliefs about holiness and purity and the relationship with God are all woven into this intricate tapestry of laws and ritual.
Exactly. And what's so compelling is that these ancient concerns about morality, justice, and social order, they still resonate with us today. So by exploring Leviticus, we're not just delving into the past, we're engaging in a conversation that spans millennia.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own values and beliefs, asking ourselves how these timeless themes continue to shape our lives.
Now, for this deep dive, we're going straight to the source. The book of Leviticus itself. No interpretations, no commentaries, just a direct encounter with the text.
And I think you'll be surprised by what we discover. There's a depth and complexity to Leviticus that often gets overlooked.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Leviticus kicks off with a detailed description of different types of sacrifices, and there's a lot more to them than meets the eye.
It's true. These sacrifices weren't just about slaughtering animals, they were imbued with symbolic meaning. Each type of sacrifice had a specific purpose, a carefully choreographed ritual, and a profound impact on the relationship between the Israelites and their God.
What stands out to you as the most significant aspect of these sacrifices?
Well, I think it's the way they integrated physical actions with spiritual intentions. For example, the burnt offering, where the entire animal was consumed by fire on the altar, represented total surrender and dedication to God.
It's like they were physically enacting their desire for atonement and a right relationship with the divine.
Exactly. And this idea of physical actions symbolizing spiritual states is something we see across many cultures and religions. It speaks to a fundamental human desire to connect with something greater than ourselves.
So the burnt offering was about complete surrender. What about the other types of sacrifices? What did they represent?
Well, you have the peace offering, which was more about communion and celebrating a restored relationship with God. Parts of the animal were eaten by the priests and people offering the sacrifice, symbolizing a shared meal, a sense of fellowship.
That's fascinating. It's like a sacred barbecue.
Yeah.
Where the act of eating together strengthens the bond between the people and their God.
And it's not just about the act of eating. Every detail of the sacrifice mattered. The specific parts of the animal that were burned, the sprinkling of blood, the role of the priests as mediators, all these elements contributed to the overall meaning of the ritual.
It makes you wonder what these ancient rituals must have been like to experience firsthand. The sights, the smells, the sense of awe and reverence.
And it makes you think about how we express our faith and spirituality today.
Yeah.
Do we have rituals or practices that serve a similar purpose, that connect us to something beyond ourselves?
That's a great question for our listeners to ponder. How do we, in the 21st century, seek atonement, communion, and a sense of connection with the divine? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel for more deep dives into fascinating topics like this.
Now, moving on from sacrifices, Leviticus also delves into another intriguing aspect of Israelite life, the concept of ritual purity and impurity.
This was a huge deal for them. Their entire lives were structured around maintaining a state of ritual purity, as they believed it was essential for approaching God and participating in religious life.
It's almost like they saw a connection between physical cleanliness and spiritual holiness.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this connection wasn't arbitrary. They had specific laws surrounding childbirth, skin diseases, bodily discharges, and even contact with the dead. All of these could render a person ritually unclean.
Wow. It sounds like a lot to keep track of. But why were these things considered impure?
That's where it gets really interesting. It wasn't simply about hygiene. These things were seen as representing disruptions to the natural order, reminders of human mortality and the fragility of life.
So impurity wasn't necessarily about being dirty in a literal sense, but about being in a state that separated you from the sacred.
Exactly. And this concept of impurity wasn't unique to the Israelites. You find similar ideas in other ancient cultures as well, reflecting a universal human concern with order, boundaries, and the sacred.
It makes me wonder about the social impact of these purity laws. Did they create a hierarchy within society? Were certain groups marginalized or excluded because of their perceived impurity?
That's a great question, and one that scholars continue to debate. It's clear that these laws had a profound impact on social structures and interactions. but the specifics are still being explored.
It's fascinating to consider how these ancient beliefs about purity and impurity might still resonate with us today, even if in a more symbolic or metaphorical way.
Absolutely. Think about our own anxieties about cleanliness, our fascination with hygiene products, our fear of contamination. Do these reflect, in some way, a lingering sense of the ancient connection between the physical and the spiritual?
It's definitely something to think about, and it highlights how these ancient texts can still spark relevant conversations about our own beliefs and behaviors.
It's all about connecting the dots, isn't it? Seeing the threads that run through history and continue to shape our present.
Speaking of connections, this idea of ritual purity is closely tied to another important theme in Leviticus, the concept of atonement.
Right, because if impurity separated you from God, then atonement was the process of restoring that relationship.
And we see this most dramatically in the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, which Leviticus describes in detail.
Yom Kippur was the one day each year when the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, the most sacred space in the tabernacle, to make atonement for the sins of the entire nation.
It sounds like an incredibly solemn and significant event. What exactly did this atonement ritual involve?
Well, it was a complex process, full of symbolism and drama. The high priest would first offer a sacrifice for his own sins. Then he'd select 2 goats, one for Yahweh and one designated as the scapegoat.
Hold on. A scapegoat? That sounds intriguing.
It is. The high priest would lay his hands on the head of the scapegoat, symbolically transferring all the sins and impurities of the people onto it.
It's like they were physically placing all their wrongdoings onto this animal.
Exactly. Then, the scapegoat would be driven out into the wilderness, carrying the burden of their sins away, symbolizing a cleansing and a fresh start.
That's such a powerful image, isn't it? This idea of releasing your burdens and starting anew.
It is, and it speaks to a universal human desire for forgiveness and renewal. We all have things we wish we could undo, burdens we wish we could let go of. The scapegoat ritual provides a powerful metaphor for that longing.
So the scapegoat was about symbolic cleansing. What happened to the other goat? The one designated for Yahweh.
That goat was sacrificed as a sin offering. Its blood was sprinkled on the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies to purify the sanctuary from the taint of sin.
So both goats played a role in this intricate ritual of atonement. What else marked Yom Kippur as different from other days?
Yom Kippur was a day of intense reflection and repentance. The Israelites were commanded to afflict their souls, which meant fasting, abstaining from work, and engaging in deep introspection.
It sounds like a time for serious soul searching, a chance to confront their shortcomings and seek reconciliation with God.
Precisely. Yom Kippur wasn't just about outward rituals, it was about inward transformation. The Israelites believed that true atonement came from a sincere change of heart.
You know, it's fascinating how this ancient practice speaks to our own human need for forgiveness and renewal. Even today, many people, regardless of their religious background, engage in practices of reflection and self-improvement.
Absolutely. We seek to let go of past mistakes, make amends, and strive to become better versions of ourselves.
And that desire for personal growth and transformation is something that Leviticus addresses in a very unique way, through the Holiness Code in chapter 19.
The Holiness Code is truly remarkable. It's like a blueprint for ethical living, offering a set of principles that transcend their ancient context and resonate with us even today.
It's almost like a standalone manifesto for a just and compassionate society.
You could say that. And what's striking is how these principles go beyond simply following rules. They call for a deeper transformation of the heart, a genuine commitment to living a life of holiness.
What are some of the key principles that stand out to you from this Holiness Code?
Well, there's the famous command to love your neighbor as yourself. This is a radical call to extend empathy and care to those around us, regardless of their social standing or background.
And there's the emphasis on treating strangers with kindness and respect, which feels particularly relevant in our increasingly globalized and interconnected world.
Absolutely. Leviticus reminds us that hospitality and compassion should extend beyond our immediate circle. We are called to embrace those who are different from us, to welcome the stranger.
The Holiness Code also calls for honesty in all our dealings, forbidding deceit and false testimony.
It's about living with integrity, upholding truthfulness, even when it's difficult.
And it stresses the importance of justice, urging the Israelites to judge fairly, to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that everyone receives their due.
These principles feel incredibly relevant today, don't they? We're still struggling with issues of social justice, economic inequality, and the fair treatment of all people.
It's a reminder that the quest for a just and compassionate society is ongoing, and these ancient texts offer guidance and inspiration as we navigate these challenges.
So much to uncover. Don't go away. There's more to come right here on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel.
We'll be right back after a quick message. Welcome back to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel. Before we took a short break, we were discussing the Holiness Code in Leviticus, specifically chapter 19. It's amazing how these principles outlined in the Holiness Code, like loving your neighbor and treating strangers fairly, still resonate so strongly today. It's like they've transcended their ancient context and speak to something fundamental about human nature.
I completely agree. These principles tack into a universal longing for justice, compassion, and a sense of shared humanity. And what's interesting is how the Holiness Code connects these ethical principles with the idea of holiness itself.
So it's not just about following rules for the sake of following rules. It's about cultivating a way of being in the world that reflects a deeper sense of purpose and connection with the divine.
Exactly. The Holiness Code suggests that true holiness is expressed through our actions, our treatment of others, and our commitment to creating a more just and compassionate world.
That's a powerful message, and it challenges us to think about how we're living out these principles in our own lives.
It certainly does. It invites us to examine our own biases, our own prejudices, and to ask ourselves how we can better embody these values of love, justice, and compassion.
It's a lifelong journey, isn't it? This constant striving to align our actions with our highest ideals.
It is indeed. And Leviticus reminds us that this journey is not just a personal one, but a communal one as well. The Israelites believed that their collective holiness, their commitment to living according to God's laws, had a direct impact on their well-being as a nation.
So there's this idea that individual actions have ripple effects, that our choices impact not just ourselves, but also the community around us.
Precisely. And this sense of shared responsibility is something we can all relate to, even if we don't share the same religious beliefs as the ancient Israelites.
It makes me think about our current social and political climate, where we're facing so many challenges related to justice, equality, and the common good. The Holiness Code seems to suggest that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world.
Absolutely. It calls us to move beyond self-interest and to consider the well-being of others, to advocate for those who are marginalized, to speak out against injustice, and to work towards a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Those are big challenges. But the Holiness Code offers a framework for thinking about how we can approach them, with integrity and compassion.
It does. And it reminds us that the pursuit of justice and holiness is an ongoing process, a journey that requires both individual and collective effort.
Speaking of journeys, our exploration of Leviticus has taken us through a wide range of topics, from the intricacies of sacrifices to the profound implications of the Holiness Code.
It's been quite a journey, and we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover in this rich and complex text.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on one more aspect of Leviticus that I find particularly fascinating: the laws surrounding forbidden relationships and practices.
This is a section that often generates a lot of controversy and debate, but it's important to remember that we're dealing with an ancient text, written in a specific historical and cultural context.
Exactly. It's not about imposing our modern values on the past, but about trying to understand the underlying principles and how they might have functioned within that society.
Leviticus clearly outlines prohibitions against incest, adultery, and homosexuality. And these were seen as violations of God's established order for human relationships.
And it's important to remember that in ancient societies, these laws weren't just about personal morality, they were also about maintaining social stability, preserving family structures, and ensuring the continuation of the community.
That's an important point. These prohibitions played a vital role in defining kinship ties, inheritance rights, and preventing social chaos.
Of course, these verses have been, and continue to be, the subject of much debate and interpretation. How do we reconcile these ancient prohibitions with our modern understanding of human relationships and sexuality?
That's a complex question, and one that requires a nuanced and sensitive approach. It's important to acknowledge the historical context, while also engaging in thoughtful dialogue about how these texts are understood and applied today.
It's a reminder that the interpretation of Scripture is an ongoing process, one that's shaped by our evolving understanding of the world and our own values and beliefs.
Absolutely, and it highlights the importance of approaching these texts with humility, seeking understanding rather than judgment.
Now, alongside these prohibitions on relationships, Leviticus also emphasizes the absolute prohibition against idolatry. the worship of any god other than Yahweh.
This prohibition was central to the Israelites' covenant with Yahweh. Their relationship with their God was exclusive, and any deviation from that was seen as a betrayal.
So worshiping other gods wasn't just a personal choice. It was a direct threat to the covenant and the foundation of their society.
Exactly. Idolatry was seen as a spiritual and societal danger, something that could lead to the downfall of their nation.
It's interesting how these ancient concerns about societal unity and religious devotion still echo in our modern world. We also see tensions and debates surrounding religious pluralism, the role of faith in public life, and the boundaries between different belief systems.
It's a reminder that these themes of faith, morality, and societal values have been woven into the human experience for centuries, and they continue to shape our understanding of who we are and how we relate to one another.
Leviticus, despite being an ancient text, speaks to these enduring human concerns in a way that's both challenging and illuminating.
It invites us to grapple with complex questions about morality, spirituality, and the nature of our relationship with the divine.
And it reminds us that the journey of understanding and interpreting these texts is an ongoing one, a process of discovery that can enrich our own lives and our understanding of the world around us.
So much to ponder and so much to discuss. Stay tuned as we delve into even more fascinating insights right here on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel.
Welcome back to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel. We've spent this episode unpacking Leviticus, a book that's often seen as a rule book, but as we've seen, it's so much more than that.
It's true, it's a window into a different time, but it also grapples with questions that are still relevant today. How we live together, what it means to be good, and how our actions impact the world around us.
And one thing that struck me throughout our deep dive is this idea of interconnectedness that runs through Leviticus. The idea that individual actions have ripple effects not just on the person, but on the community and their relationship with God.
That's a great observation. We see it in the sacrifices, where the act is both personal and communal. We see it in the purity laws, where individual states of purity impact the whole community's ability to approach the sacred. And it's definitely there in the Holiness Code, where ethical behavior is presented as essential for the well-being of the entire nation.
And it makes me think about how that translates to our lives today. We might not have the same rituals or laws, but do you think this idea of interconnectedness still holds true?
I absolutely do. Our actions, big and small, impact the people around us. Think about the choices we make as consumers, the way we treat others online, even the way we vote. It all contributes to the fabric of our society.
It's almost like an echo of that ancient idea that individual holiness contributes to the holiness of the community. But instead of ritual purity, we're talking about things like ethical consumption, responsible digital citizenship, or civic engagement.
Exactly. And it's interesting how Leviticus provides this framework for understanding that connection between individual action and collective well-being, even if the specifics look different in our modern context.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Leviticus, what would you say is the most valuable insight you've gained from this book?
For me, it's the reminder that holiness isn't about being perfect or following rules blindly. It's about striving to live a life that reflects our highest values, recognizing that our actions have an impact on others, and working towards a more just and compassionate world.
Beautifully said. And I think that's something we can all take away from this deep dive regardless of our background or beliefs. Leviticus challenges us to think about what it means to live a meaningful life, one that's grounded in ethical principles and a deep sense of interconnectedness.
And it reminds us that the journey of understanding and interpreting these ancient texts is ongoing. It's a conversation that we can continue to have, learning from the past and applying those insights to the challenges we face today.
Well, on that note, it's time to bring this deep dive to a close. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Leviticus. We hope it sparked your curiosity and given you some food for thought.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel for more fascinating deep dives into the world of knowledge.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.